The morning wafted calmly enough through Flaxborough until the door of Manning's tea shop banged open with such a force that it clattered every teaspoon in the room. Mrs. Manning herself appeared behind the counter, crimson-faced and flustered, clutching what might have been a recipe book if not for the way she held it, as though it had just hissed at her. Customers froze in mid-sip, cups suspended like porcelain punctuation marks. The cause of the commotion stood plain and awful within her hands. In the ledger where she recorded tea cake sales and sponge orders, some scrawled additions had appeared on the margins. Lists of names, dates, and sums that were not for Madeira loaves, but for bribes. And beside one name, bold as gingerbread, was scrawled, Councillor S. March, £50 delivered, Thursday. The indignity possessed all the chaos of a pie collapsing before judging. Familiar, mundane order had ruptured into scandal. Ladies craned to see. A passing postman leaned across the counter. Even Mrs. Clegg, normally unmoved by anything save jam tarts, gasped so loud her teeth practically rattled. Manning's tea shop, usually a sanctuary for mild gossip, had become a courtroom and witness box in one, and above the scattered crumbs hovered the implication that one of Flaxborough's council dignitaries had his fingers sticky beyond sugar. Once the first gasps had settled into whispers, the room birthed the inevitable wave of enthusiastic speculation. Mr. Bollard, who managed hardware next door, announced stoutly that Councillor March could not possibly be guilty, too miserly to hand over as much as sixpence voluntarily. Mrs. Pounce, leaning on her umbrella like a moral lighthouse, whispered that March had once been seen counting coins obsessively outside the vestry. And it wasn't offertory collection either. Ned, the delivery boy, muttered, "Everyone knows March and the mayor's been arguing. In writing things down, maybe he's setting March up." Through the tea shop door strolled Reverend Burgess, murmuring to a parishioner with anxious discretion, "Let's not leap to judgment. This ledger could be anyone's mischief." Yet at the same moment from behind the newspaper rack, old Harkins declared loudly, "Of course it's March," always fiddling council rates and smirking under his mustache. Each account argued against the other, each added oxygen to the fire. By the time Inspector Purbright and Sergeant Love arrived, summoned discreetly by a constable who had been refreshing himself with Eccles cakes when the scandal erupted, the ledger had been passed reverently from hand to hand like some holy text of corruption. Purbright took it without fuss yet with care, as one might handle an elderly umbrella. Gentle, curious, faintly amused. Love hovered impatiently. "Looks to me, sir, like a straight record of bribery. Names, sums, what more could you ask?" Purbright paged slowly, pausing at an unexpected corner. Nested where sponge orders turned into scones, one margin carried not a sum, but a single peculiar mark, an asterisk inked larger than the rest, almost blot-like. He traced it lightly with his finger, his gaze lifting not to the excited faces, but instead to the ceiling above the tea shop counter, where sunlight reflected from a gilt clock. He noted quietly in his book, "Ledger alteration, asterisk, ink strikingly fresh. Odd ink bottle, not Mrs. Manning's brand." He closed the ledger calmly, the detail tucked away behind his eyes. Sergeant Love blinked. "Meaning what, sir? Just a heavier pen, perhaps?" Purbright gave his mild half-smile. "When one observes a room of tea-drinkers, Love, one expects spillages, perhaps crumbs. One does not expect conspiracies explained in the ledgers of buns. This suggests either very reckless corruption or a play written for an audience. Consider which possibility produces more applause." Love scribbled this down, though his pen nearly tore the paper. "So maybe it's planted to ruin March?" "Time will tell," Purbright replied, never raising his voice above the soft purr of the teapot kettle. "And time, unlike tea, cannot be sweetened." At that very moment, Mrs. Manning, already trembling like a jelly on its plate, blurted out words that shifted the room's temperature from curiosity to shock. I must tell you both. Councillor March came in yesterday afternoon. He asked for the ledger, mind you, not a slice of Dundee cake, and he carried it to a seat. Said he wanted to check a date, but I never saw him write a thing. Several customers gasped together, one dropping her currant bun with a sorry splat. Love's eyes gleamed with triumph. That's it, then. Caught in the act. Purbright closed his notebook with his quiet finality. Or, Love, our mystery thickens. If March indeed consulted it, then others noticed. If others noticed, then what better disguise for forgery than to place it in his hands first? In crime, as in puddings, appearances flatter more often than they nourish. Before Love could digest this, a constable entered briskly, his face set with fresh urgency. Inspector, Councillor March has just been reported absent from this morning's council committee. He was seen entering the mayor's office early at 9, but when summoned for roll call an hour later, no one could find him, and the mayor insists March never visited at all. Love's pencil clattered. But, sir, that would mean he was both seen and not seen, same as Hartley in the last affair. The murmur in the Teashop swelled. Purbright merely adjusted the envelope around the ledger, placed his hand softly upon it, and remarked, so calm it chilled more than thunder. It would seem, Love, that Flaxborough keeps mistaking drama for accountancy, and that our councillors keep vanishing precisely when their names appear written in places where truth may not wish them. The ledger gleamed faintly in his hand. The clock above the counter chimed a quarter hour too fast, as if joining in the hoax. Purbright gazed at it thoughtfully, and his single remark, light as steam rising from a teacup, cut through the taut silence that followed. A town misled by clocks and ledgers, Love, will soon find itself overdrawn. The constable shifted uncomfortably. Then what shall we do, sir? He asked. Purbright's eyes softened. What we always do when fiction threatens to overwhelm. We add up the accounts properly. He tapped the ledger once with an almost playful gesture. His glance, before turning to leave, rested gently on the assembled customers and lingered a breath too long, as though the inspector himself were inviting their silent suspicions to resound beyond the tea-shop walls. With that, he stepped out into the high street, Love hurrying after him, and left behind a room marinated in contradictions. The ledger lay no longer safe in flour-dusted hands, but locked within an inspector's envelope. And yet, the shock did not end with the vanished councillor, for even as Purbright reached the station house, he was handed a telegram that made him pause. It stated bluntly, March is already in London. Attended luncheon today. Witnesses confirm. Love breathed out a stunned exclamation. But impossible, sir. He was seen here this morning. Someone's telling dreadful lies. Purbright's reply, patient and terribly quiet, slid like a knife into butter. Indeed, Love, and more dreadful still, these lies are placed by hand, upon paper, in a book meant to keep no secrets at all, which means, I fear, our case will unfold as ledger entries often do. Columns of loss, additions, and eventually, balance. He shut the telegram between his palms with a snap. The town, the tea-shop, the council, all waited for clarity. But for Inspector Purbright, the scandal was only beginning. The absence of March was not disappearance, but theatre. He was certain only of this. Bigger figures than tea cakes were being reckoned. More answers in next chapter. But first, what's your theory? Who tampered with the ledger and why? Comment below. Inspector Purbright sat behind his desk, the tea-shop ledger closed but not forgotten, while Sergeant Love fidgeted opposite him, with his notebook already bulging. The town outside hummed like a wasp's nest stung too early in spring. Councillor March had apparently been seen by reliable eyes in 2 places at once, slipping into the mayor's office in Flaxborough and dining contentedly in London an hour later. People spoke of trains faster than steam and of double lives, though the simplest explanation, that someone was lying, never appealed to Flaxborough when the exotic was available. Love tapped his pencil fiercely. "It's plain as day, sir. Someone wrote March's name just to ruin him. That asterisk you spotted proves it." The writer drew attention to the line on purpose. "March, meanwhile, runs off to London and leaves us holding fool's errands." Purbright's gaze wandered to the window, where clouds shunted across a bleached sky. "One should never confuse absence with guilt, love. London provides witnesses. Here, only nervous Teashop customers. Creature comforts do not diminish an alibi. What interests me," he continued softly, "is not where March was, or was not, but why his name alone was chosen for our ledger morality play." They began the morning by revisiting Mrs. Manning, who produced the volume's blank duplicate, the newer ledger she planned to start that Tuesday. Its pages smelt faintly of flour. "I told you, Inspector, nobody but me keeps record here," she insisted ringingly. "If March sat down with it, he only leafed through. Of ink I saw nothing." Purbright handled the new book with small reverence, then set it back. Strange, is it not, how criminals expect no one ever to reread old ledgers, yet the very routine of such books, their innocent repetition, makes them attractive for forgery. No one suspects malice among scones. Love interjected. "Except you, sir. You suspect malice everywhere." Purbright gave a brief, quiet blink that might have been humour. The next inquiry brought them to the council offices. The mayor, perspiring at his broad desk, feigned outrage at the whole affair. "Preposterous! To think this borough believes a councillor accepts cash in a Teashop ledger. If anyone profits from such slanders, it is our enemies in the county press." Purbright asked gently, "Were you with Councillor March at 9 o'clock that morning?" The mayor blinked, mopping his brow. "I most certainly was not. I told your constable as much. I reached my office at 9:15. By then, the place was empty." Love scratched his notepad. "But others swore they saw March enter your office before then." The mayor puffed. "Eyewitnesses in this town believe more gossip than gospel. Find truth, Inspector, if you can, but don't consult the good ladies of Market Street for it." As they left, Love whispered, "He's sweating like a thief. He could have hidden March for all we know." Purbright, descending the steps slowly, replied with his needle-thin smile, "Or he sweats because scandal soils even those who are guiltless. Nevertheless, note his eagerness to assign our witnesses the role of liars." Their next call was Fitch, nursing bitterness after last month's humiliation in the flower show affair. He sneered openly at the inspector. "Fancy March's turn now, eh? I warned you, Purbright. Every councillor in this town trims his sales to bribes. You'll fill your prison before your teapot." Purbright nodded mildly. "And yet, Mr. Fitch, it is curious only that March's name decorates the book. Not yours, not the mayor's, not half the others. Why think March selected for ruin?" Fitch's lip twitched with satisfaction. "Because March pries too deeply into matters of development. He dug and sniffed for impropriety. Those who dig are often buried." Later that afternoon, returning down the high street, they encountered Miss Digby, standing with peculiar agitation outside the tea shop itself. Her eyes avoided theirs, but she could not help whispering as they passed. "It wasn't March's hand in that ledger. Look at the letters, Inspector. The style, the slant. It's thinner, like someone who disguises their own boldness." Then she slipped away before Love could demand an explanation. Inside the station, Purbright unwrapped the ledger again, setting it between him and Love. "She is right, Love. Notice the angle. Our writer leans his hand unnaturally to the left. March writes upright, almost military. Whoever thought to mimic handwriting produced not March, but a parody. The asterisk is the true voice, enthusiastic, far darker than the careful lines. Which leads us to our first fork. Someone attempts not merely forgery, but theatre." Love rubbed his temples. "So, where does that leave March? In London, or here in disguise?" Purbright glanced almost fondly at him. "It leaves March a name in ink, love. Whether in London or on the moon, his usefulness lies now in being brandished before others, and brandished he shall be until we learn what figure accepts such substitution." Evening had just reddened the sky when a constable hurried in. "Inspector, you're wanted." The rector found another book in the church porch this afternoon. It's a hymn book, all right, but scrawled margins, same as the Teashop ledger. Lists of bribes again, but this time the name belongs to the mayor. Love whistled softly. First March, now the mayor. Someone's tallying cupboards. Purbright closed the Teashop ledger firmly, then gestured for his hat. "Yes, love. The first account was scandal enough. But as with ledgers, every credit asks its balancing debit, and now it appears our forger intends to ruin the borough by bookkeeping." The church bell tolled 7 over a town already consumed by whispers. The false accounts were spreading like yeast left unchecked, and Purbright, with Love at his side, stepped out into the dusk, knowing the deception had only begun fermenting. The hymn book lay upon the rector's broad desk like a patient awaiting diagnosis. Beside its psalms and holy notations sprawled inky heresies, the same cramped left-leaning hand that had invaded Mrs. Manning's ledger. At first glance, the scribblings might have been explanations of chorus numbers, but closer inspection revealed lists of coins, dates, and a single clear name written twice over: the mayor's. Sergeant Love, hovering with visible excitement, muttered, "That makes it simple now, sir." First March, then the mayor, all written in, both plainly accused. Whoever's doing this must be spreading the guilt evenly. Equal opportunity, as it were. Inspector Purbright stood with one hand, tucked neatly into his waistcoat pocket, the other lightly resting on the hymn book's spine. It would be agreeable if murderers and mischief-makers kept their larceny symmetrical, love. Unfortunately, life seldom balances to accountancy. Someone intended us to see March tainted, but immediately balanced the page with another name to avoid the odor of obviousness. That tells us less about corruption on the council, more about the caution of our forger. The rector, nervous and eager to show distance from the scandal, insisted the hymn book had been on the porch table all morning. "I've no notion who left it there. It simply appeared between funeral booklets. I assumed Mrs. Tressport had abandoned one of her practice manuals until a boy pointed out the scribbles. Horrid business, Inspector." Purbright's mild thanks quelled further hand-wringing. With both the Teashop ledger and now the hymn book in careful custody, the two officers left the rector staring helplessly at his shelves of honest psalms. Outside in the cooled air, Love shook his head. "Seems to me there's a systematic hand here, sir. First a tea shop, now a church porch. If it's the same writer, we've a town campaigner at work, branding council members as cheats and rogues across every book in reach." Purbright's reply carried the curious neutrality of one who considered a butterfly landing on his sleeve. "And if that be so, Love, the pattern enlarges. If a church hymnal can be infected, then so might the library's catalogues, the butcher's order sheet, or the register of births. When lies multiply this way, their purpose is seldom conviction, it is confusion, a fog thick enough that even innocence appears guilty." The following day proved that suggestion truer than Love expected. While Purbright devoted his morning to inspecting the blot of ink in the hymn book margins, different from the asterisk in Mrs. Manning's ledger, yet unmistakably of the same enthusiastic hand, a constable barreled into his office with yet another article. "Stationer found this in his return, sir. A copybook from the schoolroom, scrawled all through with the deputy mayor's name, same infernal columns of money. Parents are raising hue and cry already." Love groaned. "That's 3 councillors named in as many days. By tomorrow, half the council will be sentenced by nib and ink." Purbright tapped his finger lightly against the copybook cover. "Exactly, Love. You see how the pace hastens? Mischief seeks to overwhelm. 1 or 2 names in question might demand an inquiry. but a dozen written down across hymnals and copybooks. Then suspicion becomes theatre, not indictment, and all are tarnished alike. A council equally befouled invites no reform, only laughter. The sergeant's pencil stuttered across paper. So it's less an exposé, more a play. Someone wants the borough discredited entirely. Purbright closed the copybook with careful gentleness. Perhaps. Yet seldom is outrage committed merely to amuse the public. Some individuals profit, while all others drown in suspicion. Our task is to ascertain whose pockets are lined while ink flows so freely. That afternoon, they visited Councillor March's house. Mrs. March greeted them with a stiff attempt at dignity, though anxiety quivered through her voice. "I've had notes shoved under the door, Inspector. Anonymous hands scribbling my husband's guilt across scraps of grocery paper. We are at our wits' end. He only returned from London 2 hours ago and is furious that he is made villain of Flaxborough." Purbright asked to see these scraps. Folded clumsily among the day's post, he found 3 halves of paper. Each bore the same shaky left-handed lean. The ink here bled more, suggesting cheap pens, but the hand was the same that had scribbled hymns and ledgers alike. When March himself appeared, hot-colored and defensive, he exploded, "This is personal vengeance, Inspector. I've campaigned against gross proposals for development on the riverside, schemes that line private coffers. Someone means to silence me. But it won't work. Smear my character if they wish. I'll call it slander. I demand arrests." Purbright's reply settled like cool cloth against a burn. "Arrest thrives on certainty, Councillor. At present, we collect only manifestations of ink. Paper shouts, yet voices remain silent. Until we know who guides these pens, the town will continue its epidemic of forgery." As March stormed off, Love muttered, "Well, sir, he certainly looks aggrieved enough to be innocent. Unless, of course, he planted all this to make himself appear a victim." To this, Purbright gave only the quietest. Sometimes martyrs write their script with greater enthusiasm than villains. The trick is distinguishing saints from playwrights. By evening, word had already galloped through Flaxborough that not only March and the mayor, but half the council had begun appearing in books with scandalous annotations. Shopkeepers sprouted conflicting theories. Some claimed it was a satirist, others swore it was some sort of blackmailer preparing the ground. Others again whispered vaguely of communists. From the snug of the King's Head emerged a notion that the vicar himself had invented the whole thing to increase piety through spectacle. Love, head reeling from the contradictions gathered on his patrol, complained, "Everyone suspects everyone. We've no single thread." Purbright stood once more beneath the parish clock, its great hands carrying remorselessly past 9. His eyes half closed as he answered, "Threads, Love, are tricky. If they tangle, most lose patience and cut them altogether. But if one follows knots with care, eventually one sees where one hand began twisting." He gestured vaguely back toward the square. The blots, the lean of the writing, the theatricality, too visible for accident. These crimes are noisy, desperate to be seen. Whoever pens them wants all of Flaxborough as the audience. There, Love, lies our direction. We do not follow the ink. We pursue the applause it seeks. Love wrote the words faithfully, though he sighed. Doesn't get us nearer to our culprit tonight. Purbright, with the faintest ghost of a smile, slipped his notebook into his coat. "Patience, Sergeant. Like bookkeeping, mysteries demand careful addition before subtraction, and I suspect our forger will not be able to resist one more entry before long. When that comes, we shall read it differently than the crowd." The church bell began tolling over a town once again, feverish with whispers. By the sound's final note, every councillor in Flaxborough found themselves disgraced or doubted, according to which book had appeared that day. But for Purbright, though the ink darkened and the gossip grew louder, a shape just discernible began to emerge, not of multiple villains, but of a single hand, theatrical and proud, willing to smear an entire borough so long as its smoke obscured the truth of one particular fire. By midweek, Flaxborough had ceased to function as a town and begun to resemble a jury that never adjourned. In shops, on street corners, even at the railway station, conversation clung to one topic only: the mysterious ledgers that damned councillors with every turn of a page. The gossip grew richer, the accounts more elaborate, though certainty remained stubbornly absent. Inspector Purbright, quietly patient as always, chose not to push against the tide but to observe how far it would wash. He knew already that the forger's appetite for spectacle would require one more appearance before the week was done. That expectation proved correct when word arrived that Mrs. Manning had arranged a public clarification in her tea shop. She had been mortified that her honest ledger had sparked a scandalous inquest and, pressed by half a town eager for drama, had agreed to host councillors and townsfolk alike to explain matters openly. To Purbright's mind, this smelled more like a stage invitation than a sensible gathering, and so he attended with Sergeant Love on his heels, careful not to betray too much eagerness lest their very presence fuel the drama. By the time they arrived, the tea shop was choked with bodies. Tables had been shoved against the wall, leaving only a central space where Mrs. Manning stood pale, her hands wringing a tea towel. At her side loomed Councillor March, crimson with indignation, and opposite him the mayor, puffed with anger at having his name spread across hymnals. Customers stood shoulder to shoulder, whispering and tittering, while outside still more pressed at the windows. Mrs. Manning raised her voice above the hum. "Friends, neighbours, I beg you, this matter has nothing to do with tea cakes. My ledgers are for buns and sugar only. Whoever put those wicked notes there, it was not me. Inspector Purbright shall tell you himself." Every head turned toward him at once. Purbright merely inclined his head and said, "The handwriting is not Mrs. Manning's. It belongs to another hand entirely, a hand somewhat too eager to be noticed." A ripple of satisfaction passed through the room. But then, as if on cue to prove his point, a constable pushed through the door holding up a slim notebook. "Found this on the doorstep, sir. Slipped under the mat not 10 minutes ago." Gasps scattered the crowd, like birds from a hedgerow. Purbright took the notebook calmly, though he noted the timing with an inward sigh of inevitability. He opened it where the pages had been scrawled with the by-now familiar left-leaning hand. The ink named Councillor Fitch this time, with sums beside his initials nearly double those found beside March. The room boiled. Voices faltered into shrieks. "So Fitch is guilty!" someone cried. Others leapt instantly to declare, "Then all of them are corrupt." March shouted for order. Fitch himself stumbled forward, roaring denials. The mayor bellowed for the constables to seize him, and Mrs. Manning clapped her hands ineffectually in horror. Cups shattered, chairs toppled, spoons rang against floorboards. Love stood shield-like beside Purbright. "Well, there it is, sir. No denying it now. Whoever writes these wants the whole council shipped off." But Purbright, lifting his hand for quiet, spoke so softly that the straining crowd hushed in spite of itself. "Ladies and gentlemen, another book has appeared, yes. And again, one of your councillors is named. But do you notice the pattern? Each time a new volume emerges at a moment when scandal threatens to settle, when gossip risks quieting. Just as conversation lulls, voila, a fresh outcry." The mayor demanded angrily, "Then you admit they are all false?" Purbright closed the notebook. "I admit only this. Their sudden arrivals are never innocent. Someone knows the hunger of Flaxborough for entertainment, and someone feeds it like a sweet tooth. But those who eat too much sugar, Major, sometimes find the taste conceals rot beneath." Before the assembly could respond, a commotion sounded at the doorway. A fraught young clerk from the council burst in, wide-eyed. "Inspector, come quickly. The safe at the council office, forced open, papers scattered. The hubbub froze, then thrummed with fresh awe. Purbright replaced the notebook in its envelope. "To Love," he said. And there, you see, the first real theft among all these fictions. While we peered at forged names, someone sought to claim true papers. He turned to Mrs. Manning with a bow of apology. "Forgive the disturbance, madam. Your tea cakes will recover. Now it is time we examine which documents were worth ruining a town's appetite." The Teashop crowd spilt into the street behind them as the inspector and sergeant hurried toward the offices. It was half a procession, half a mob, following in, greedy procession for revelation. By the time they reached the municipal building, 2 constables were already posted at the door. Inside, the council chamber lay in disarray, filing drawers wrenched, metal locks snapped, the mayor's strongbox pried. Papers littered the carpet, most ordinary, some damning, all abandoned save one space cleared deliberately. A gap yawned obviously where certain files had been removed, as Love bent to retrieve a crumpled page. "Mostly just minutes and memos, sir. Nothing is worth all this fuss. Except, look here, the missing folder's label. Riverside Development Proposals. Gone, completely." Purbright stood with hands lightly folded, surveying the chaos with that detached courtesy which so unnerved his opponents. "So that, Love, is the reason our councillors are written everywhere but truth. The forgery exists to exhaust the town in scandal, so that when real papers vanish, no one remembers which were genuine." As constables began gathering what remained, the muffled clamor of the crowd outside seeped through. Voices shouted accusations against March, the mayor, Fitch, anyone unlucky enough to hold a council seat. The uproar had spread from the tea shop to the chamber, and now the entire borough reeled in the same storm. Love muttered, "So what now, sir?" "We've got a missing file, half the council branded corrupt, and a mob ready to believe every scrap they see scribbled in the margins." Purbright gave a rare sigh, soft as dust. "Now we wait for the author of this play to take another bow. They will not resist. Applause is too sweet. And when they stride once more onto their stage, we shall follow the thread they failed to cut." As they sealed the chamber and pushed past the absorbed townsfolk, thunder growled faintly at the horizon. The air smelled charged, restless. Purbright raised his eyes once more to the parish clock, its hands sliding steadily toward midnight, and in that ticking silence, he remarked almost to himself, "Theatrical criminals, Love, cannot survive without their audiences. But the play is nearing its climax, and eventually every author betrays himself in the desire for a finale." Through the night, the streets of Flaxborough carried the hum of argument, sharper than the evening wind. With the discovery of the missing Riverside Development file, citizens no longer confined their speculation to tea cakes and hymnals. Now the talk was of fraud in stone and mortar, of bribes measured in building contracts rather than buns. Yet by morning, the most confident voices had returned to a single conclusion: Councillor Fitch. His name had been dredged from the latest scrawled notebook, after all, and the council safe had been prized open by someone obviously familiar with the building. Rumour, hungry for a culprit, clothed him in guilt at once. Inspector Purbright, however, received the news of Fitch's unofficial conviction with the expression of a man watching children chase a paper kite into a hedge. Sergeant Love, entering his office breathless from collecting statements, delivered the clamour with eagerness. "It's settled, sir. Everyone swears it's Fitch. He was seen lurking near the offices last evening, and he's the only councillor brazen enough to profit openly. Why, half the town is ready to march him into the dock." Purbright poured tea with unflustered calm. "Ah, yes. Convenient how mobs trade in certainty when proof is lacking. Tell me, Love, did anyone actually see him breaking a lock or carrying a file beneath his coat?" Love hesitated. "No, sir. Only passing reports of his hat outside the offices, and the book with his name. Still, where there's smoke, There is often a smoker, Purbright interrupted mildly, but not always a fire. Let us test smoke before assuming flames. Their first task was to summon Fitch himself. He arrived at the station railing with fury, hat jammed too tightly on his head. This is persecution, Inspector. Slander yesterday, conspiracy today. I'm ruined simply by ink scribbled in a shop ledger and the idle gobs of tavern drinkers. Do you think I'd be fool enough to leave my own name in forged notebooks? Purbright regarded him calmly. Some fools do, Counselor. Others would find opportunity in playing the victim of an obvious setup. Which are you? Fitch faltered, attempting bluster but falling back into indignation. I have enemies. I fought against that riverside scheme myself. I said it stank like a fish cart left in the sun. Of course, they want me buried. When he stormed out under escort, Love muttered. Enemies, yes, but still guilty. He practically shouted it. And so, Purbright murmured, eyes half closing, he looks the part assigned to him. Convenient theatre once again. Guilt shouted is less reliable than guilt whispered. Later that day, the supposed evidence against Fitch grew thicker. A bookseller on Market Lane presented a sales record showing that, weeks before, Fitch had bought cheap school copybooks, the very sort littered now with forged bribery notes. Delivered with solemn outrage, the revelation stunned Love. There you have it, sir. He purchased the very books that now accuse him. Purbright fingered the receipt without visible reaction. Interesting. A counsellor buys books for children, perhaps, and suddenly they become evidence of schemes in margins. And our townsfolk, how quick to present such proof, like eager actors producing props. He folded the paper carefully away. But townsfolk needed no inspector to steer them. By dusk, cries of "Fitch out!" rang through the snug of the King's Head, and in drawing rooms, matrons pronounced his name with disdain previously reserved for undercooked pastry. That evening, stone splinters appeared on his window-sill where small rocks had been flung, and his poor wife drew curtains against the mutterings of boys outside who had drunk more rumour than ale. Purbright, walking slowly beneath the parish clock, said to Love, "Observe how swiftly hatred obeys suggestion. The ledger names him, then books, and, coincidentally, bookseller, all rush forward like chorus lines. But villains rarely hand us proof so neatly stacked. Think, Love, if Fitch truly stole the Riverside documents, why bother scribbling his own name about town? Why not remain silent and enjoy the loot instead of advertising guilt?" Love frowned, scribbling. "So you're saying someone wants us to chase Fitch so hard we ignore the real thief, like running at a scarecrow while the fox takes chickens?" Purbright's smile barely touched his lips. "Well put. Our scarecrow shouts as loud as his accusers, too loud at once. The fox grows fat while we watch the straw." The following morning confirmed Purbright's suspicion. Constables searching Fitch's home failed to uncover a single trace of the missing file or any incriminating draft. Not even a blot of ink matched the theatrical handwriting smeared across ledgers and hymnals. What they did find, in a drawer Fitch swore was planted, was another scrap. This time naming Councillor March once again as the recipient of coin. The sudden reappearance of March's name threw the town into pleasurable confusion. Some bayed for both heads side by side. Others claimed it proved Fitch had forged it in desperation. The more the story spun, the less anyone could be clear who had sinned enough to warrant punishment. Mrs. Manning, trembling under the fresh storm of customers pawing her counters for gossip, declared dramatically, "Perhaps it's a secret cabal. Imagine every councillor guilty together, plotting in shadows over cups of tea." Reverend Burgess whispered more cautiously, "Or someone clever enough to make us believe precisely that, so no one councillor can ever be trusted again." Amid the babble, Purbright sat at his station desk and perused each document anew. He noticed a subtle rhythm. Every new incrimination emerged just as suspicion threatened to rest, each one inflaming the town further. First March in the ledger, then the mayor in hymns, then Fitch in notebooks, then March again in scraps. A circle so even that it became suspicious. And all the while, one folder, the Riverside Development Plan, was missing, priceless to someone unseen. Love muttered, biting his pencil, "If it's not Fitch, the town will riot when we release him." "Release him we must, love," Purbright replied softly. "For false suspects serve their purpose till they collapse under the weight of contradiction. Let him shout himself free. The true culprit still requires their curtain call." By releasing Fitch the following morning, Purbright delivered the town its sharpest frustration. Crowds gathered, expecting handcuffs and condemnation. Instead, the inspector's calm announcement, "Evidence insufficient. Further inquiries continue," sowed fresh outrage. Within an hour, the market square roared with debate fiercer than before. Some wept injustice for March, some hissed malice toward Fitch, and a few muttered cynically that all officialdom was rotten beyond saving. Through it, Purbright strolled gently, Love at his side, both seeming to breathe the chaos as though it were weather passing. "See, Love," Purbright remarked toward the howling crowd. "A false suspect makes for splendid fuel. The fire roars brighter than truth ever could. Observe well, for our culprit's pleasure is being played upon this very stage. When the flames die, they will reveal themselves, picking calmly through the ashes." Love nodded grimly, yet his pencil shook as he scribbled. "But, sir, how do we know when the flames die down enough for ashes?" Purbright glanced skyward to where the parish clock's hands dragged past noon with patient inevitability. When noise fails to deceive even those who live for gossip, when the town begins to exhaust itself, then our culprit must invent fresher drama. That will be their mistake, and we shall be waiting. The release of Councillor Fitch had not extinguished the town's gossip. It only redirected it, like wind turning smoke across another quarter. By evening, voices rang at every bar and shop counter, each declaring a new certainty. Fitch guilty still, Fitch cunning victim, Fitch in alliance with March, Fitch planted by the mayor. The names rotated like cards in a conjurer's hand, none ever staying long enough to form proof. Inspector Purbright, with Sergeant Love shadowing him, let the noise scatter but knew the theatre demanded a second act. Their culprit, entranced by performance, would not let the curtain fall so soon. It came, as Purbright had guessed, at the following council session. The chamber filled beyond capacity, townsfolk pressed like theatre patrons hoping for fireworks. The mayor sat leaden and puffed, March rigid and flushed, Fitch visibly pleased to attend in freedom, however temporary, and the rest tense, wary glances darting across polished wood. On the desk before the clerk lay the great Borough Minute Book, thick, leather-bound repository of council records stretching back years. It had been locked safely in the mayor's strongbox since the previous uproar. Tonight it would be brought forth to demonstrate order and transparency, to assure the people that business, like time, continued unbroken. Purbright felt the air stir even before the cover was opened, sensing anticipation like a conductor about to strike the first note of a discordant symphony. The clerk turned pages solemnly, his finger tapping margins to demonstrate to the public they remained clean. But when he reached the most recent entry, his hand faltered. In the candlelight, fresh ink swarmed on the paper, letters slanted left in that now familiar theatrical hand. And there, written inevitably across official minutes, were new accusations. Councillor Digby, recipient of illicit sums, signing her initials beside amounts too precise to deny. A shriek clattered from Miss Digby's own throat, echoing cruelly around the chamber. "Lies! I never! Inspector, this cannot be allowed." Her face drained of colour, and the crowd, properly shocked, erupted into furious argument. Some cried, "All of them are in it," while others, loyal to Digby's quiet reputation, shouted for the arrest of the mayor who had secured custody of the book. Fitch seized the moment to declare loudly, "There is your pattern. When I am cleared, my rivals appear. Proof enough we are all framed." Order collapsed. Townsfolk pounded on the benches. Councillors leapt to their feet, shouting denial and recrimination. And amidst the uproar, the mayor waved his chain like a warning lantern. Love pulled at Purbright's sleeve. "This is madness, sir. The very minute book, sacred as scripture to them. Whoever smuggled that in has gone too far." Purbright, however, looked upon the chaos with his habitual mildness. He closed the book carefully once retrieved, shutting both its pages and the Tempest with the same calm motion. "Indeed, love. Too far at last." By choosing the minute book, the culprit reveals himself more clearly than even he intended. Only very few had custody of these pages, and very few possessed the courage, or foolishness, to think the handwriting would be overlooked because the record was sacred. When the meeting adjourned in shambles, tempers crackling outside the chamber, Purbright carried the great volume beneath his arm like a holy relic rescued from profanation. Townsfolk pressed against the doors, demanding names, demanding punishment, but he offered none. Instead, he slipped the book into station custody under lock, his face grave but not surprised. That evening in his office, as rain began needling against the windows, Purbright examined the entry under a bright lamp. Even without his magnifier, the signs were plain. The ink had bled faintly, made from the same cheap source as the scraps sent earlier. The hand leaned left as though dragging reluctant letters. An asterisk lurked again beside a line, compulsive signature of the forger. He leaned back in his chair, eyes soft. "You see, love, how criminals cannot abandon their flourish. The asterisk betrays him more surely than the names he scrawls. This campaign was devised not to convince, but to enthrall. And enthrall it has. But every theatre leaves behind its stage handprints." Love paced restlessly. "But, sir, who? We've narrowed it down by access." The mayor swore the book was locked in his safe, but the safe was already forced days ago when the Riverside file vanished. Anyone might have added this while the papers were scattered. Purbright turned a page back, then another. "Possibly, but the timing is too precise. Each book, each scrap, appears always when attention might fade. Our culprit is present among us, watching closely for his cue. That tells us he is a participant in these gatherings, not a distant agitator." Once more the parish clock tolled outside, muffled by dripping gutters, and Purbright raised a finger as though marking the rhythm. And his motive remains the same, the Riverside documents. These theatricals are misdirection. Councillor March was loudest against the project, and so has been doubly smeared. The mayor had an interest. Thus, he is implicated. Fitch, a long-time nuisance, dragged in. And now Digby, the quieter figure, but also one with access to records. The circle tightens until guilt is equally shared across so many faces that the true thief might slip invisible. Love clenched his fists. "So we chase shadows until he grows bored, until the whole borough's in ruins?" Purbright shook his head gently. "No, love, until he performs one gesture too extravagant. This, ink in the sanctified minute book, is nearly so, but not quite the finale. Wait for his hand to delight in triumph, and then we reach our answer." That night, Flaxborough swirled with fury. Some claimed every councillor was corrupt. Others insisted a secret writer had bewitched the town. Printed slips even appeared in gutters, handbills denouncing Digby in the same crooked hand. Neighbours collided with accusations across garden fences. Wives scolded their husbands for voting fools into office, and men cursed newsprint that had not yet caught up to the scandal. Above it all, rain dripped steadily, muting but not silencing the clamour. In the station at midnight, Purbright rose, pocketing his notebook. "Love?" Bleary asked. "Where are you going at this hour, sir?" Purbright replied, almost like a remark to himself. "Theatres have stage doors, love." and actors rarely leave without glancing at their applause. "I believe it is time to attend the back entrance." He walked gently into the drizzle toward the council offices. Behind the building, by the littered yard where crates mouldered, he paused under his umbrella, and then, as patient as a clock waiting to strike, he stood until he heard what he expected. The subtle rasp of drawers opening again, a figure riffling unseen papers by lantern glow. Purbright did not announce himself, not yet. He only watched the reflection of light shift across damp stone and felt the corners of his mind close like the covers of a ledger truth. By dawn, he knew, the town would witness not another planted scrap, but the first true crack in the culprit's mask. The drizzle had eased into a fine mist, enough to blur the lamps of the square, but not enough to conceal the glow from the back of the council offices. Purbright, sheltered beneath his umbrella, watched the faint orange tremble, widen and narrow as if nervous fingers shifted the lantern. He remained still, letting the trickle of water across his hat brim measure the minutes. Sergeant Love, stumbling against stones and muttering indignantly about damp uniforms, leaned closer at last, whispering, "Sir, there's someone in there. Shall we rush them?" Purbright's voice, soft as the dripping of branches, held Love in check. When a stage magician forces us to watch one hand, it is wise to observe the other. Let us not rush the act before the prestige. Through the half-shuttered window, the figure inside was only a silhouette, but its movements told a story. Drawers pulled, papers shuffled, a page studied by lantern glow, then slipped into a coat. Love shuddered with impatience. "That's the stolen Riverside folder, I'll wager." Purbright inclined his head. "Or a copy. Either way, our thief confirms his appetite by repetition." He tapped Love lightly on the arm. "Come, we approach without trumpets. We will learn more by surprise." They moved through the yard, the mud sucking faintly underfoot. When Purbright opened the rear door with practiced noiselessness, the lantern-wielding figure glanced up in alarm. There, crouched half within the mayor's cabinet, was none other than Mr. Larkin, the clerk who earlier had claimed to hear Hartley's voice before his supposed death weeks before. His eyes bulged behind round spectacles, his face white and guilty as chalk. Papers sprouted from his hands like feathers from a rootless bird. Love surged forward triumphantly. "Caught in the act. I knew it must be an insider. Sir, this is it. We've got our fox." Purbright's palm raised, pressing calm back into the air. He stepped gently forward, speaking in a tone that felt more like sympathy than accusation. "Mr. Larkin, how difficult it must have been to watch this storm rage and not cry, remembrance that your own office key fit the very locks we found broken. Now here you are, compelled to collect the last of the evidence before it condemns you. Your compulsion is your confession." Larkin's arms trembled, pages falling in an untidy snow. It's not what you think, Inspector. I only meant, yes, the files. But not the ledger scribbling. I had no hand in those damnable books." His voice cracked, half plea, half wail. Love shook his head briskly, scribbling. "Convenient line, sir. He admits theft, denies forgery. That's clever as begging for half his sins excused." But Purbright's eyes remained steady, fixed upon the panicked clerk. "You see how desperation breeds honesty, Love. The ledgers, hymnals, notebooks. No. These bear an extravagant hand, a fever for theatre. Our clerk, cautious and colourless as filed paper, lacks such flourish. One can picture him stealing quietly, not scrawling his employer's name to the rafters. This man may have stolen documents, but I doubt he painted plays upon Teashop margins." Larkin let out a strangled sob and grasped Purbright's sleeve. "Inspector, I was ordered to bring these files, to burn them. I'm no villain, I'm too weak for it." I obeyed. "Ordered by whom?" Purbright asked softly. The clerk flinched. His eyes darted left and right, as if shadows might overhear. Finally, he whispered, "Councillor March." He told me Hartley's opposition would ruin the scheme. Said if I didn't destroy the file, he'd see me dismissed as incompetent. I was only following instructions. Love blurted, "March again." "Sir, this circles back neatly. First, his name in the ledger, and now Larkin names him outright." But Purbright looked on the trembling clerk with tranquil skepticism. "One must question, Love, why a guilty man already smeared in ink would then risk one more voice against him. If March commanded so, why not protect Larkin instead of leaving him to rot in temptation? A man threatened into silence seldom cries his master's name unless planted. Guilt has finally undone him." Love frowned, confused. "You believe him, but doubt him, sir?" "Both," Purbright replied gently. "He may speak truth of being pressed, but the hand pressing may not be March's at all. Threat and opportunity easily disguise themselves." They escorted Larkin to the station with little fuss. His collapse into shameful muttering required none. Yet by morning, word of his arrest leaked shamelessly. Market stalls erupted with laughter at the clerk who lost his ledgers, and by mid-morning, half the town concluded Councillor March finally stood exposed as the puppeteer of a weak man. Children chalked March's name on walls, and men in pubs toasted his imminent fall. The mob had found another false certainty. Purbright walked beneath the parish clock, watching smoke from chimneys twist into the pale sky. Love hurried beside him with reports. "Sir, this is perfect. It all tallies at last. March must have used Larkin as his pawn. Fetch files, scrawl false bribes, plant them around. He had the motive, opposed projects left and right. He had reason to smear his rivals before being smeared himself." Purbright, as if discussing weather, replied, "If perfection arrives too soon, Love, it usually conceals a flaw. Observe how each revelation comes just as suspicion wanes. Every time the crowd begins to quiet, a new proof leaps forth. Our culprit thrives not in conviction, but in commotion. Whoever directs this farce will not stop at one frightened clerk." As if to underline him, a runner from the library stumbled up breathless. "Inspector, we found lists scribbled across the catalogue cards, every councillor's name in ink, each with sums beside. The whole library is in uproar." Love groaned aloud. "The entire council again. Sir, our culprit's circle widened till no one's innocent." Purbright inspected the single card handed over. The same left slanting scrawl, another asterisk. "Indeed, Love, a finale approaches. The more the hand writes, the less each name weighs. In such abundance, guilt evaporates. Only the handwriting remains constant, faithful as shadow." He looked to the crowd gathering already in the square, voices rising like a hive, disturbed. The crescendo builds. Soon the musician at last must show himself, for applause is louder than discretion. That evening, Purbright positioned himself again within the tea shop, sipping gently at weak tea while around him the town thundered with argument. Love sat restless, his notebook quivering. "Do we wait until the culprit makes another move, sir? Or do we confront March tonight?" But Purbright's reply drifted like smoke. "No, Love. To confront too early only adds one more false account. Let the showman raise his curtain one last time. Tomorrow's performance will be grand. Tonight we simply listen." And so he listened, as Flaxborough trembled on the edge of riot, waiting eagerly for its next illusion. The parish clock struck 9, untroubled, but Purbright's quiet gaze upon its steadiness told Love all he needed, that when the clock's next hour announced itself across the town, their showman would not be able to resist one more act, and in it he would finally reveal his name. The night after the great commotion, Purbright allowed himself no rest. He chose instead to walk slowly through the darkened town, his shoes sending faint clicks across the cobbles while gaslight shimmered in puddles. Behind curtained windows, Flaxborough buzzed like a hive that should have slept but refused to. Whispers carried even through brick, as though the entire borough rehearsed its lines for tomorrow's renewed scandal. He saw shutter frames rattle with argument, heard laughter in the rhythm of outrage, caught fragments of recrimination traded like dart flights across parlor rooms. Every voice seemed to play its part in sustaining the forger's theatre. By morning, the air itself felt tired of the gossip, though people could not quiet themselves. Purbright decided it was time to go behind the noise, to observe not just documents and handwriting, but the character of those who had become entangled in the farce. A forge of drama could not hide the quality of its players when examined up close. He began with Councillor March, summoned again from his brick house on Northgate. March appeared anxious, his usual bluster tempered by gauntness, his eyes ringed by fatigue. His wife trailed him into the sitting room with the loyalty of one bruised by gossip but stubbornly dutiful. Purbright chose not to confront, only to observe. "It has not been an easy week, Councillor," he said gently. March's mouth twisted with bitterness. "Do you know what it is, Inspector, to walk into your club and feel men turn away as if you carried contagion? To have your wife collect the milk while boys chant, 'Bribe taker,' from behind hedges? My record of service, years of it, made ridiculous by ink scratches. If someone wanted revenge, they've succeeded." His wife's thin hands twisted together. "He is pompous, yes. I've endured that for years, but never corrupt. He spends every penny twice before yielding even a farthing. Can you not see, Inspector, it is hatred dressed to look like truth? They want him wrecked." Purbright let silence sift through the room until their confessions shrank back into breathing. Then he asked softly, "And among your fellow councillors, who would stand to benefit most from your disgrace?" March's eyes glinted. "The mayor. Without doubt. He opposed me on every matter, and I opposed him. But if you want puppeteers, ask about Larkin. That clerk has always waited for stronger men to speak, then repeated their phrases. Perfect tool for a greater hand." Love scribbled furiously, underlining mayor 3 times, though with less certainty than his strokes implied. Their next visit was to Councillor Fitch, who opened his door with the expression of someone both triumphant and wounded. "You see, Inspector, they let me out. And what happens? The very next day March's man is caught. Doesn't that prove it had nothing to do with me?" Purbright said mildly. "And yet your name persists in the parish's notebooks, Councillor. Guilty or not, one might admire how much ink you've collected. Tell me, how does it feel to be painted villain in that way?" Fitch gave a noise halfway between a laugh and a cough. "Like a pig daubed for market. I see neighbours cross the road. My children are taunted. But do you know, I've begun to enjoy it. After all, even villainy is attention. March the mayor, they always hog the debate. Now they whisper my name in every kitchen." Love peered up sharply. "You enjoy being accused?" Fitch smirked. "Better infamous than ignored, Sergeant. That clerk Larkin, craven little man, he'll bear the weight for them all. You will see. I only regret I cannot print the truth myself." Love scowled, muttering, "Sounds to me his ego's bigger than his guilt." Purbright observed quietly, "Sometimes egos supply as useful a motive as greed. A man might embrace scandal if only to taste significance." From Fitch, they turned to Miss Digby. Unlike the men, she seemed visibly broken. She let them into a room of wilting flowers, her hands trembling as she offered no tea. Her voice was brittle. "I cannot show myself at meetings. The other women whisper, call me complicit. If Hartley had lived, perhaps I would still have ground. Now I am a little more than ink in margins." Love shifted uneasily. "Then you deny any part in these scribblings, ma'am?" Her eyes moistened. "Deny, with all that I have. But denial is brittle armor when the town longs to believe otherwise." She touched her hand to her chest with desperation. "Inspector, I admired Hartley. He believed in appointments by affection, not only politics. They will twist even that into corruption. Am I to be left with no name at all but a liar?" Purbright bowed his head slightly. his voice almost kind. "The difficulty, Miss Digby, is that lies travel faster when they ride upon whispers of truth. If you admired him publicly, it makes for fertile soil, but admiration is not a crime." She bit her lip then, whispering, "Unless another uses it so." Later that afternoon, Purbright walked slowly along the riverside, Love at his side. He watched men ferrying crates, women washing linen, and children darting along banks. Ordinary life continued, unaware of council minutes and hymn boards. He stopped to gaze where the proposed development was marked by timber posts. "You see, Love, what lies beneath?" he asked. Love frowned. "Only mud and water, sir." "Precisely. Mud that would make some rich if exchanged for brick. That is our true root. Everything else is theatre, and those who gain from building upon that mud are the ones writing their evidence in books that should remain blank." By dusk, they returned to Mrs. Hartley's house, the widow of the councillor from months before. She had lived quietly since, but gossip had dragged her into conversation once more. She received Purbright in a black dress still smelling faintly of lavender. Her voice was cold but steady. "You think of Hartley in this fresh scandal, Inspector. Again his ghost is trampled upon by these forgeries." Purbright answered, "I think those who gain by ruining reputations are the same who once gained from ending his." "There is a symmetry. Mrs. Hartley, may I ask, did you ever see Larkin's closeness to your husband?" Her eyes dimmed. Always lurking under his elbow, Hartley called him indispensable. Yet I saw him as a sponge, soaking up scraps, repeating them, selling them perhaps. A willing echo, needing only a voice to obey. She hesitated a moment, then added, "If you find the hand now laying ink across this town, you will find the hand Hartley meant to expose." Love scribbled again, whispering, "So it loops us back to Larkin, sir. Everyone points there." But Purbright, gazing lightly at the parish clock struck by the fading sun, murmured, "Or everyone is directed to point there." He turned from the widow, his voice soft. "When all gestures point one way, it is usually the wrong direction. The true hand stands still while others gesticulate." The evening closed on Flaxborough, heavy with sorrow, suspicion, and exhaustion. Through character and confession, Purbright had learned the true damage was not ink, but shame. March's pride battered, Fitch intoxicated by unwanted infamy, Digby hollowed by grief, Larkin crumbling into dishonor. Yet beyond each mask, one intelligence orchestrated their ruin with relish. As lamps winked across darkened windows, Purbright whispered as though the whole town might hear him, "In accounts, Love, balance only emerges when every column is tested. Tomorrow, I think, we shall discover who has balanced these ledgers with such cruel arithmetic." The following morning dawned clear but restless, as though even the weather had grown suspicious of Flaxborough's tempers. The market square bustled, earlier than usual, with townsfolk whose errands seemed fabricated excuses to linger in one another's company, to trade the latest variations of scandal like brass coins. The mayor stalked heavily to his offices, ignoring whispers. Councillor March moved briskly toward his club with shoulders hunched. Fitch flung remarks loudly to anyone pretending not to hear, and Miss Digby walked quickly, eyes down, as if distance alone might protect her from suspicion. Inspector Purbright, taking all this in from the police station window, observed to Love, "When all suspect all, none can think clearly. It is at times like these that the hand behind the curtain presents another diversion." The diversion arrived sooner than even he predicted. At midday, a boy rushed panting into the square, waving a volume above his head. "Another ledger," he shouted, delight and terror tangled in his voice. He slapped it down upon the steps of the town hall for all to see. People crowded, jostling, craning necks. A constable fetched the volume quickly enough, but not before 20 eyes had read what mattered. Half the council named again with figures in the margins, and this time scribbled crosswise on the cover were the words, "All guilty alike." It spread instantly, more swiftly than jam upon toast. Men shouted, "There you are, the whole lot corrupt," while others muttered incredulity. "No, someone wants the borough destroyed entirely." Women exclaimed this was proof the devil himself had guided the pens, and boys giggled as they scratched councillors' names on paving slabs. By early afternoon, the sight of the new ledger had drawn nearly the whole town to the green. Purbright stepped into the hubbub flanked by Love, who exclaimed bitterly, "This ends it, doesn't it, sir?" All of them written there, every last one, impossible to sort. Purbright bent over the book where constables held it as though it carried contagion. His mild gaze drifted from page to page. The same hand, the same theatrical lean, the inevitable asterisk stamped like a performer's curtain call at the edge of sums. He closed it softly and observed, "This is not the end, Love. It is the loudest flourish before silence. Observe, when a man has accused one, then two, then three, and finally all, he ceases to discriminate. That is not truth. It is exhaustion." The crowd pressed forward, hungry for direction, and Purbright let them see the firm close of his envelope around the book. "This too joins the others," he said simply. He gave them no verdict, and in withholding provoked louder clamour than any dramatic announcement. That evening the mayor convened what he styled an emergency meeting on the green to declare order restored. Flaxborough arrived in throngs, as much for drama under lamplight as to hear pronouncements. March was there, twitching with impatience, Fitch pounding his cane against flagstones to emphasize how wronged he had been, Miss Digby, pale, nearly lost among her shawls, and poor Clerk Larkin, under guard, still muttering half-explanations of his disgrace. When the mayor rose to speak, thunderous objections cut him short. Citizens howled for resignations. Someone flung a cabbage core. For a moment, it seemed riot might swallow the borough until Purbright, stepping slowly forward, spoke with that eerie calmness that always bent uproar into uneasy silence. "You are invited to believe that every councillor is guilty. Their names litter our books like crumbs across a floor. Do you not notice, however, how those crumbs always lie where you will see them most easily? In a Teashop ledger, upon a hymn book, across a library catalogue, even forced into the very minute book you hold sacred. These are not crimes discovered. These are crimes performed." A hush spread, broken only by Love's scribbling. Purbright continued, voice steady as a pendulum. "A true criminal conceals. Our forger advertises. Each new script arrives at the exact moment suspicion wavers, as though cued by the conductor's hand. And now comes the crescendo, a book naming all so that the true thief may hide behind the chorus. Only one man or woman has danced so tirelessly across these margins." Eyes spun across the crowd, hunting the culprit. When whispers began to gather toward March again, Purbright shook his head gently. "No, not March. Too loud, too obvious, too consistently pushed forward. He protested as we expected, but his hands lacked both theatre and patience. Nor Fitch, too vain to scatter his own name 3 times across forged ink. Nor Digby, whose trembling would hardly stand to leave her house for such mischief. Murmurs deepened. The mayor puffed indignantly. "If not them, Inspector, then who? Produce your phantom poet." But even as voices swelled again, a cry came from the edge of the green. A constable ran, waving another discovery, a scrap of paper pinned boldly to the parish notice board. On it, in theatrical ink, sprawled the words, "Tomorrow the truth will be balanced. Tomorrow all shall be settled." The crowd moaned like an organ. Some laughed, calling it a prankster bent on headlines, and others shuddered that prophecy was upon them. Love hissed under his breath, "He taunts us now, sir, dares us to wait for his finale." Purbright accepted the slip with a look of resignation rather than surprise. The orchestra readies for its last chord, love. Our author promises balance, which suggests he knows already his play cannot continue without breaking. Tomorrow he will stretch too far. He turned his head slightly toward the mob, almost conversationally. One might notice, even in farce, the villain must appear in person for a final bow. Through murmurs of awe, anger, and dread, the parish clock tolled 9. The sound resounded across the green, steady, faithful, immune to ink or intrigue. And Purbright, raising his gaze to those unfaltering hands, whispered low enough for love alone, to catch, "When the hours strike again, we shall be ready," for at last our author's appetite outspeeds his caution. The town of Flaxborough woke the next morning already leaning toward performance, the promise of revelation written plainly on the scrap that had been pinned to the parish notice board. Shops opened late while neighbors loitered around the green, their errands improvised, their words heavy with predictions. Some insisted the culprit would appear with a written confession, others muttered about fires at the council office to eradicate everything in one last blaze, and a few whispered, with relish sharpened by fear, that Henley's ghost, perhaps speaking for Hartley's murder half a year ago, would stride out at noon clutching the real account books. For Inspector Purbright, such gossip required no reply. He knew already the forger's thirst for theatre demanded a spectacle. By mid-morning, the stage was set. The mayor strutted heavily across the square, blustering that order must be restored before the town destroyed itself in anticipation. Councillor March followed stiffly, unable to prevent the hisses that greeted him. Fitch, relishing notoriety, deliberately paused to greet hecklers, smirking as though fame itself outweighed dishonor. Miss Digby moved quickly, ears red and eyes lowered, while poor Clerk Larkin, escorted wearily by constables, looked less like a conspirator than a man destined to collapse under the weight of gossip. Sergeant Love marched beside Purbright, notebook ready, nerves alive. "If he means to settle it today, sir, then we must be sharp. He'll make some bold stroke." Purbright's answer was soft, measured. "Yes, love. And bold strokes are often too heavy, leaving ink blots that betray more than words reveal." It came just before noon. A boy, always a boy, chosen cleverly enough for innocence, appeared suddenly in the square, carrying not one but several slim notebooks bound with string. He flung them onto the steps of the town hall and shouted, "The truth! The final balance!" before vanishing into the crowd. Pandemonium reigned. Men lunged forward until constables seized the notebooks and delivered them to Purbright beneath the gaze of hundreds who pressed close, desperate. Love's face blanched as Purbright opened the first cover. Margins filled with the crooked, left-leaning hand listed every councillor's name in one column, each accompanied by numbers larger than before, amounts absurd in scale. On the inside front cover, a declaration sprawled jaggedly. "Every seat bought, every head sold. Their ruin is your justice." The crowd howled like an animal wounded. Some cried triumph as if vindicated finally, while others cursed that their governance was revealed bent from top to base. Fitch raised his fist, shouting, "There it is!" "We're all condemned," while the mayor roared back for order, and March shouted oaths of innocence. Miss Digby sobbed openly, and Larkin whimpered in his constable's hold. Love leaned on Purbright's shoulder, whispering, "This is it, sir. He means to flatten the whole council, leave none standing. No one escapes." Purbright closed the book calmly. He raised his hand, and the crowd gradually quieted under his unwavering composure. "Listen to your own clamor," he said. "Each of you believes now that corruption is universal. A convenient solution, for if all are guilty, no one is particular. But I tell you this, no criminal seeking profit would spread guilt so broad. To blacken every name is careless. It profits no one. It serves only spectacle." He lifted the notebook higher. "Notice how the amounts swell, beyond reason. Such exaggeration is an actor losing discipline in his final act. The curtain call is at hand. The mayor shouted that forgeries must be punished immediately, but his words were drowned by a new commotion, a cry that smoke was rising from the council offices. The entire square turned in panic as black plumes unfurled from its chimney. Purbright moved at once, his long steps carrying Love and the constables with him. Within minutes, they barged into the smoke-thickened chamber where flames licked the papers strewn clumsily across the hearth. By lantern glow and cinders, Purbright stooped, plucked out half-consumed parchment, and noted the title even as ash crumbled between his gloves. "The Riverside Development Proposals," he murmured. "So here lies the true purpose, hidden behind weeks of farce. Every forged scrap, every smeared margin was meant to keep eyes away until these could be destroyed at leisure." Love coughed through the smoke. "But who lit it, sir? Who's here?" From the gloom of the chamber, they heard the creak of a door hastily slammed. Purbright quickened his pace, emerging into the corridor in time to glimpse a shadow fleeing. The inspector did not hurry himself. He knew panic revealed more than pursuit could. They found the mayor, panting wildly, clutching keys as if to steady himself. He sputtered at once. "Not me. I came only to save what I could." "See, the lock was sprung." Love hissed. Caught red-handed, he had the key and opportunity. But Purbright's eyes remained thoughtful. Perhaps. Yet his panic reads more of fear of being accused than guilt of kindling the flames. "No, Love, our culprit escapes still, though his act leaves prints deeper than ink." The flames were smothered quickly. What was rescued proved partial, but significant enough to record that certain names indeed stood to gain vast sums from Riverside development. Enough for Purbright to confirm that Hartley, that persistent spectre of Flaxborough's conscience, had been ready to expose it before his sudden death months ago. By dusk, the town reeled. Some accused March or the mayor of arson. Others claimed Larkin had sneaked free to finish his master's bidding. Still others muttered of Fitch in jealous rage. Yet Purbright, once again beneath the parish clock's calm face, spoke quietly to Love. "Do you see, Sergeant? Our culprit must turn to fire at last. He cannot help himself. Too many papers survived, despite the tumult. Too many eyes grow weary of forgeries. Final desperation always overshoots its mark. We are one step from the truth," Love said grimly, "and one step from the mob tearing the town apart." "When will you act, sir?" Purbright's gaze lingered on the clock's hands edging toward 9. "When the play writes itself into a farce so grand that even the actors cannot maintain their roles. Then, Love, I shall close the book." The town awoke the next morning with soot still hanging in the damp air, as though the council chamber's fire had settled across roofs and streets alike. Rumor crawled faster than smoke. Some swore they had seen the mayor himself fleeing from the blaze with papers under his coat. Others whispered that it had been March disguised in a borrowed hat. Fitch relished the story so loudly in every pub that by noon people were talking more of his boasting than the fire itself. And in parlours, over carefully arranged tea trays, there was agreement that if no councillor was innocent, the safest solution was to demolish the entire borough council and let business be run by someone sensible, like Mrs. Clegg. Inspector Purbright, however, did not leave the town to stew too long. He sent short, precise summons to every councillor, every clerk, Miss Digby, Mrs. Manning, and even the rector, whose hymn book had first been blemished. By late afternoon they were gathered again in the teashop that had birthed the scandal, pressed together among tables smelling of sugar and steam. The townsfolk crowded outside, peering through glass, breathing condensation onto the panes. Purbright chose the stage of this final act carefully, for he understood theatre. Scandals that began with ledgers of buns must also end where the crumbs first fell. He stood at the counter, the very ledger closed before him, its cover plain as crust, his hands resting upon it like a tombstone. Sergeant Love hovered nearby, notebook trembling. Purbright began without theatrics. His voice was mild, his gaze steady. We have seen how mischief multiplies by ink. Names copied across books, sums scrawled against them, the crowd invited to believe that every councillor here is corrupted alike. We have seen the very minute book desecrated, the library catalogues sullied, and at last even fire summoned to consume genuine documents. But the truth, as in arithmetic, lies not in excess but in balance. Today we restore balance. The mayor huffed, March flexed impatiently, Fitch smirked, and Miss Digby kept her eyes lowered. Larkin, pale and sweating, squirmed as though nailed to his chair. Purbright allowed silence to lap across them like a tide before continuing. The riverside proposals were what mattered. Councillor Hartley intended to expose them. He died before he could. Since then, theatrics have played across Flaxborough. Forged ledgers, copied handwriting, accusations tossed as freely as confetti. All of it was devised to keep eyes dazzled, all while certain pages could be removed and burned. But actors tire, and mistakes betray the play. Love blurted, "The handwriting, sir. You mean the left-leaning scrawl?" Purbright nodded slightly. Our mysterious author left his mark too faithfully. Every fragment bore not just crooked letters, but a signature flourish. The asterisk. That star appeared in Mrs. Manning's ledger, on hymn book margins, even in the new council minute book. So eager was our culprit to leave his theatrical calling card that he did not notice he also placed it where genuine clerks had initialed papers. That, and here he lifted a charred page rescued from the fire, betrayed him. For here, amid boring minutes 10 years old, appears the same asterisk, a flourish no true council hand ever used. It is inserted, repeated, attentive only to drama, not record. Our culprit was no councillor. He was the man always moving quietly among papers, catalogues, and filing drawers. The man whose hand was on everything, yet whose presence was never questioned. Mr. Larkin. A gasp rolled around the Teashop. Larkin gave a feeble cry, half plea, half protest. "No, I said I was ordered. March told me, I swear." Purbright's tone stayed calm. "Ah, yes, Councillor March, your shield since yesterday. But what profit did March truly gain from smearing his name across half a dozen books?" "None. The one who profited was you, Mr. Larkin. You who had access to every file, who copied signatures daily, who could slip ledgers from tea shops under the pretext of delivery and hymnals during vestry cleaning. You envied the councillors whose words you echoed, and in Hartley you feared exposure most. He had already warned others of the clerk who kept more than copies for himself. With Hartley gone, you could attempt your own revenge. Ruin those above you by branding them corrupt, and conceal the theft of developments that might place you, obscure clerk though you were, in the way of bribes." Larkin's hands shook violently. "No, I was no more than a servant. I only obeyed." Purbright's voice sliced through with soft finality. "A servant leaves no trail of stars in the margins. That vanity was yours. Not March's, not the mayor's, not Fitch's. Yours. You could not resist seeing your handiwork talked of in every corner. Each uproar was applause, and you longed to hear it. But applause fades once the curtain falls, and tonight the curtain must fall indeed." The room had frozen, the mayor staring wide, March sagging into his chair, Miss Digby covering her mouth, Fitch half smiling as if delighted that it was anyone but him. Love's pencil scratched breathlessly. Outside at the glass, people pressed harder, straining to witness. Purbright continued evenly. "The fire last night was your undoing, Mr. Larkin. In destroying the Riverside papers, you left behind one half-burned scrap bearing your beloved flourish. No councillor would decorate minutes in that fashion. That asterisk was not guilt shared, it was your signature alone. And in your eagerness to clear the stage, you revealed your hand. Deflated, Larkin sagged forward, mumbling incoherent protests that even he seemed too weary to believe. The constables moved to take him quietly, and the tea shop's air, heavy with flour and tea, seemed to exhale at last. Purbright closed the ledger with finality. There is your balance. The council may be untidy, perhaps ungraceful, but not universally corrupt. Flaxborough has been gulled by a clerk who mistook spite for spectacle and vanity for justice. The mayor began to bluster. Thanks. March groaned like a man reprieved. Fitch announced loudly that he had known it all along, and Miss Digby wept silently into her handkerchief. Purbright ignored them all, lifting instead his gaze toward the window where the congregation of townsfolk, hearing fragments, now shouted astonishment and satisfaction alike. The scandal was already dissolving into anecdote, its sharpness dulled into story. As the crowd broke and scatterings of cheers drifted through the door, Love murmured, "So that's it, the hand behind all the scribbles, all the theatrics. A clerk with a love for ink." Purbright gave the faintest smile, eyes returning to the parish clock with its hands steady against the early dusk. "Yes, love. A little lust for applause and a petty resentment for power can topple reputations faster than true corruption. But unlike time, theatre cannot run forever. The town applauds now, then it will forget, as towns always do. Only the clock continues honestly, never leaning left, never scribbling margins." He set his hat upon his head, nodded to Mrs. Manning, still clutching her tea-cloth with relief, and with Love by his side stepped out into the cooling air. Flaxborough's square teemed already with renewed gossip, not of guilt, but of how cleverly the inspector had played his lines. For the people, it was entertainment concluded. For Purbright, it was merely another balance entered, another ledger closed, another scandal ended not in fire, but in silence.